Hey guys, welcome here to Stu's Garage. Today the daily driver is going to be getting a little bit of TLC. I had planned on actually making a DIY video for you guys on how to change brakes on pretty much any car, but there's plenty of videos that are already on the internet, and I don't think that would bring any value to the channel or to you guys. So rather than bore you guys with a simple DIY, we're going to have story time with Stu. So on this first ever installment of Storytime with Stu, we're going to talk about how many engines I've blown up in the Drift Fox. So first off, disclaimer wise, I don't care if you like the LS, I don't care if you dislike the LS. I don't work for Chevy. I'm not here to sell you an LS engine. It's what I use, it's what I like, and it's what's here. I don't necessarily feel the need to justify my decisions for, folks that say I should have done one thing or another. I'm happy with what I chose, and I'm going to stick with it. I just kind of want to put the story out there, the correct story out there, because folks have kind of used me as an example of, oh yeah, those LS engines are always blowing up. And not that I necessarily care about what the rumors are about me or anything. I just don't want somebody to be discouraged about doing things that they want to do because of misinformation. So for that reason, I just wanted to put the correct story out there in case anybody's interested in finding it. Pretty much everything that I show you here on this channel is to take you through things as I learn them. I show you my mistakes so that you don't have to go through the same drama that I've been through. And at the end, there's usually a lesson and everything. As with this story that I'm about to tell you, there's pretty much, I'll take you through the lessons that I learned in the end, and hopefully you can prevent from doing the same type of things that I did. So without any further ado, we're going to go ahead and get into it. So the Drift Fox has had 3 different LS engines in it, and there were probably about 5 different events where I thought that I had blown my engine. I actually only blew my engine one time. The other incidents were various mechanical failures. Pretty much all of the breakages were my fault, and I'll go ahead and take you through them. So, engine number 1. You guys all saw the process of me swapping engine number 1 into the car. That was pretty much your junkyard swap and go motor. Now, it wasn't just any old junkyard motor. That was a special engine, but we're not going to get into that. I got that motor from essentially a junkyard. I swapped it into the car. We didn't check anything. We looked it over. Everything looked good. But the point is, when they build these engines, they build these things to microscopic tolerances. And there's certain things that you just can't see with your bare eyes. So we did look it over. It looked good. We slapped it into a race car with maybe 200,000 miles on the engine. And we took it straight to the track. Not only did we take it straight to the track, but I also let Chelsea DeNova drive my car, which for those of you all who don't know who Chelsea DeNova is, he's probably, in my opinion, he's the best driver in FD, Formula Drift, which is the highest professional league of drifting in the United States. And Chelsea's known for being a very hard driver. So again, I don't blame Chelsea for breaking my engine. If he broke it, it was going to break anyways. But basically, he hopped in the car, he drove it the way he drives. The engine ended up breaking. We don't know exactly what caused it to break. It was likely cam bearing failure, which caused oil starvation in the bottom end, which caused the bearing to spin, and that was basically it for that engine. So a spun bearing on an engine isn't necessarily the end of the world, but you can't just slap a new bearing in there and expect your engine to keep working. There's a lot of stuff that has to happen once you spin the bearing on an engine. Essentially, the whole bottom end has to come out. Everything needs to get rehoned, because when that impact starts happening, it messes everything up inside the engine. Everything gets out of whack. So everything has to get rehoned. You have to replace the bearings, of course, and you have to get everything checked out, and that can be kind of costly. So in the midst of me getting all of that stuff done to that motor actually got stolen by folks that were helping me. And that's really unfortunate. Once that happened, I ended up getting myself a 5.7. I built an LS6 motor, which was still cool. It wasn't as cool as the motor that I previously had, but it was still a good motor, and I was generally happy with it. So, I says, I'm not going to cut corners this time. I'm going to take this engine, I'm going to get it fully checked, done, everything by professionals. That way when I put it in the car, I know it's going to run. Because basically what happened to the first motor is we didn't check it out. We slapped it in the car. We hoped that it would run like everybody else's LS does, but I happened to be unlucky. Mine wasn't that good. So I sent it back to the shop who stole my motor. I didn't know at the time what had happened, but basically that motor went back to the same people. They checked the motor out, and I got the engine back, and I began to put that back in the car. At the same time, I was doing my own upgrades on my end. I decided I was going to upgrade my valve springs, and I went from a single valve spring to a dual valve spring. And I looked at the DIYs on the internet, and I thought, yeah, I think I can do this. So I popped all the valve springs out. I had a little bit of trouble putting the new valve springs back in, but I got them in there. So I got the motor back, put the valve springs in it, rebuilt the motor, and we took it out for tuning. And it was really difficult to tune that motor. Things just weren't right about it. Something just wasn't right. But it was in there. I was happy. I'm just thinking to myself, like, okay, that's just the quirks of the new motor. It'll work itself out over time. About a week into me driving that engine, not even a week, I probably put about 50 miles on that engine before the same thing happened. I was out one night, started ticking really bad, knocking really bad, and barely got the car home, and I thought it was the same issue. I says, I've blown another motor. So I parked it here in the garage, and I started to take it apart. So the first thing I did is I pulled the valve cover off as I'm taking it apart, and I see that I have a broken rocker. So looking at that, I'm thinking, oh, okay, it's just a broken rocker. I can slap a rocker back on it and everything will be good. But I started to look a little bit closer, and I noticed that like my valve springs were broken, and all types of stuff was broken inside of the head. And once that happened, basically I was really sketched out, after having that failure. And I said, whatever happened, I'm still going to pull the engine anyways. The heads were damaged. I had to take the heads to a shop. And when I took the heads to a different shop, they basically told me that the dual valve springs need some additional hardware in order to operate properly. So engine number 2 broke because I put dual valve springs in there without all the correct dual valve spring hardware. Shame on me. But upon further inspection, looking at that motor, I paid the shop that did that motor for me a lot of money to refresh the bearings, to check all the clearances and do everything. They didn't do any of that. They took the motor, they set it off to the side, and they called me like 4 months later, and they told me everything was done. And then when I showed up to look at the motor, certain things that I asked for weren't done, and I had to take the motor back to them. And then they called me back the next day, and they had me come pick up the engine. So engine number 2 was a scam engine. They scammed me, they took my money, they didn't build it properly, and it broke because I slapped valve springs in it that I didn't have all the hardware for. So, although engine number 2, my LS6, was likely fine, it was a shady deal with shady people. I didn't trust the engine, and I didn't want to have anything to do with it. So I basically shelved that motor. I was going to sell it, and I ended up giving it away to a friend. I bought another version of the first motor that I had in my car. And that one went to a new shop, which had a much better reputation. That one went straight to the shop. It got all new everything. All new bearings, new piston rings, fresh honing, everything. It got the full treatment. So essentially, engine number 3 going in the car was going in like a brand new engine. And I could have full confidence on it. It even had some slight upgrades done to it in the bottom end that you wouldn't, like it was almost built like an engine that you would build for boost. So I was happy, I had a solid engine. I spent a whole bunch of money on it, and that was like my Hail Mary, like, I can't do this anymore. This has got to work, or I can't keep doing this. So anyways, engine number 3 goes in the car. And at that point, I'm like, well, shoot, I've got an all-new engine. I might as well not put any old parts back on it, especially a $15 disposable part. I'll just go ahead and get myself new ones, which would be the lifter trays. Actually, happen to have a lifter tray. Lifter trays, these guys. So anyways, I decided I was going to purchase brand new lifter trays. There was nothing wrong with the ones that I had previously that I had been using. They were a little bit old. I could see that they're made out of plastic. They were a little bit brittle, but they were functioning fine. I said, let me just go ahead and buy a new one. I didn't know what a lifter tray was. I didn't know what it did. I just knew where it went and how to install it. So I purchased brand new lifter trays. I put them in, put it in the car, and I started driving the car. And everything was good for a while. Put a lot of miles on the car. It always made a really weird noise, and that noise always made me really uncomfortable because I felt like the engine was going to blow up. It ran good, but it was making that funny noise. Something just wasn't right. So in my mind, I had pretty much come to terms that there's no way you can rebuild an engine and have it ever work the same again, and I knew that this engine was going to blow up. So one day, driving along, coming home from church, and I made a really horrible noise after I made a pull, and again, started ticking and knocking. So I'm thinking to myself, boom, I've destroyed another engine. And at that point, I was pretty much ready to give up on Drift Fox. It had been way too hard, to that point. I had tried everything. I had called professionals. I had experts to assemble things, and nothing was working. And you just can't keep doing that. So I had to let the car sit for a while. I actually even considered selling it, but it just wasn't going to work. So it just wasn't going to work, especially with a blown motor. So I decided I'd go ahead and take a look and at least see whatever it was that I could see. So I started pulling the engine apart. I checked the rockers. The rockers looked good. They were loose. I couldn't tighten them. Didn't know what that was all about. And the more I started to take it apart, I started to notice, little bits of metal all throughout the motor. And when I got the heads off, I had noticed that one of my lifters exploded, and all the other lifters were getting chewed up. So, after a long night of reading and research, I figured out what a lifter tray does. And there's a whole video analyzing that you can find. I'll put a link down in the description. But essentially what had happened is I had used the wrong lifter trays. The lifter twisted inside the engine, and it was no longer rolling on top of the cam. It was just banging into the cam. So that destroyed my cam, it destroyed the lifters, it sent metal through the engine, and it put me out of business. So once again, took the heads off of the motor, sent those back to the shop to get fixed, replaced all the lifters, bought correct lifter trays because I knew what I was looking for this time. Did as much remediation as I could, got as much metal out of the engine as I could. I didn't pull the engine or anything, but I trust me, I did a lot of work to get metal out of the engine. There's still a little bit left in there, which makes me a little bit uncomfortable to this day, but everything's been working out. So anyways, you know, I didn't really know what to expect through that. Put the engine back together and got ready to start it, and you know, everything ran. And it was cool, but the engine was still making a really weird screeching noise. So again, I'm thinking to myself, you know, this isn't going to work itself out. There's definitely further damage going to the engine. And I even said it on video because I made a video of it at the time. And I basically concluded the video with, you know, it looks like we've killed another one. This engine has to come out of the car. Well, right after that video, I basically explained what was happening to my buddy Thomas. And he was just like, oh, well, did you make sure that your crank pulley was tight? And I was like, oh yeah, you know, I tightened it down. You know, I made sure, you know, this was my stupidity again. I didn't tighten it as much as I should have because I was being cheap, and I reused a crank bolt, and those can have a tendency to snap off inside of your crankshaft if you reuse them. You're not supposed to reuse those. But I, you know, decided to do that anyways. So I bought an entirely new crank bolt, the expensive one that is reusable. I tightened that down, I put it in the engine, and everything ran fine and ran quiet. So the next video you guys saw, I was driving the car. But those are basically all the instances where I either broke something or thought that I broke something. And in the end, you'll see that I basically only blew one engine. I had a lot of other mechanical failures, but they were all due to my own inexperience and trying things and not having the whole story before I tried them out. So pretty much what I've learned through this process is trial and error. I've learned how to build an engine, sort of. I've learned that you can't necessarily trust every single person that you come across, unfortunately. And I've learned how to do a lot of things on my own. So, you know, through that, that's basically the story of how many engines I've blown up in the Drift Fox. So, I hope you like this episode of Story Time with Stu, and we'll catch you on the next video.